What the threes are really doing, the three people are really selling, are their company names.
We're not having discussion to say, are these people good human beings?
Going up in space for 10 minutes, well, going to close to the edge of space for a flight that lasts 10 minutes where you're weightless for 1.5 minutes, I don't call that space exploration.
They're actually taking on a lot of personal risk because, for example, even Jeff Bezos, everybody hates, but he's on the first crew to go up there.
On July 20th, 1969, American astronaut Neil Armstrong became the first human to set foot on the moon. As he stepped on its dusty surface, he famously proclaimed, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." That was the culmination of a space race started by John F. Kennedy with the aim of beating Soviet Union to the moon.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
But not everyone in the U.S. was cheering that summer's day.
I can't pay no doctor bills, but Whitey's on the moon. 10 years from now, I'll be paying still while Whitey's on the moon. You know the man just upped my rent last night? Because Whitey's on the moon. No hot water, no toilets, and no lights, but Whitey's on the moon.
A half-century later, the echo of these words and the ethical concerns they raised remain, except that this time we are in the middle of a space race not between competing nation-states, but tech billionaires, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, and Elon Musk. Some argue the money can be used to solve more urgent crises on Earth at this particularly vulnerable time for humanity, with a pandemic still raging, inequality still rampant, and global warming rising to dangerous new levels. So one cannot help but wonder, will the billionaire space race benefit our future, or are we just all watching some rich boys play with their expensive toys? My guests today have their answers. Very different answers. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a debate on this motion. Will the billionaire space race benefit humanity? Arguing for this motion, Zhang Fan, Associate Professor with Astronomy Department at Beijing Normal University. His partner, John Clark, President of Mars Society Australia, Research Associate with Australian Centre of Astrobiology at University of New South Wales. Their opponents, Quentin Parker, Director of Laboratory for Space Research at University of Hong Kong. Teng Jimeng, Associate Professor of American Studies at Beijing Foreign Studies University. So gentlemen, welcome to you all.
Thank you for inviting us.
Hello.
So first of all, we will give each of our debaters 1 minute to make an opening statement. And let's start with Professor Zhang Fan from Beijing Normal University. He is arguing for this motion. Professor Zhang, the screen is all yours.
Right. Okay. So I do understand people's concerns, especially the visual of being left behind and nobody cares. They're going to space and leaving poor people on Earth. However, I think the notion that because we still have unsolved problems, we shouldn't be out there exploring is a misguided one. Because technology and science in general and space exploration in particular, they generate more wealth. They make the cake bigger. For example, for the Apollo project, every dollar you put in, you get $7 or $8 back, and nowadays it's 40. So the problem, on the other hand, on Earth, I think is more to do with how you divide up the cake. It's about politics, whether you spend money on wars or you poor people, whether you play tribal politics and making democracies into tyranny of the majority, whether you pay your workers according to how easily they're replaceable, like commodities, rather than how much wealth they create. So this kind of a problem you can't solve by diverting the tiny little fund that space actually occupies. With the Apollo project, even in today's money, it's only $160 billion. The Afghan war, the direct extra appropriation is $2 trillion already. So that's not going to solve the problem. And also, for billionaires doing it, I understand a lot of people think that they're just doing joyrides, doing an exclusive club thing. However, they all have long-term, more substantial commercialization of space programs going forward, and the space tourism part is just basically their scheme to get more funding for that. And the larger projects will inevitably all benefit us because you can do a lot in space that you can't on Earth. And in fact, I would go so far as to defend the billionaires a little bit. just 1 second. they're actually taking on a lot of personal risk because, for example, even Jeff Bezos, everybody hates, but he's on the first crew to go up there, so he's taking on a lot of personal risk. You don't do joyrides for that kind of risk.
Okay, thank you, Professor Zhang Fen, for your opening statement. And now our next speaker is Professor Quentin Parker from University of Hong Kong. He is arguing against the motion. Professor Parker, please.
I'm arguing against the motion of Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, not Elon Musk. I want to make that clear because they're very different characteristics. I'm all for space exploration, actually. Going up in space for 10 minutes, well, going to close to the edge of space for a flight that lasts 10 minutes where you're weightless for 1.5 minutes, I don't call that space exploration. I do take the point of the other speaker that it may be more grander and in more important dreams further ahead. But let's be honest here, we're going through a period in the world where the difference between the haves and have-nots has actually widened enormously during the COVID pandemic. And I've mentioned about the Afghan war, the actual cost is $5 trillion. As released today by a study in America about the cost of the Afghan war now and going forward for all the veterans that will need support. But anyway, that aside, we've had more luxury yachts sold in the last 3 years than the previous 20. People are buying yachts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So we're talking about space tourism where people are going to spend $1 million to go up in Jeff Bezos' rocket for a 10-minute flight. What could they do with that $1 million? Well, they could open a hospital. They could feed 10,000 students in Africa for a month. There's all sorts of things that kind of money that these individual people's vanity of wanting to say, I've been into space, I've floated around for 1.5 minutes. I mean, really, it's a question of what can that money be done and used for? Richard Branson at least comes from a background of transport with Virgin Atlantic, and he's been an entrepreneur for decades. He's got airlines, and at least you're going up in a plane, you're having an experience that lasts for an hour. The Jeff Bezos flight is 10 minutes from beginning to end and 1.5 minutes in space when you don't really get into space, really, and you're not actually going anywhere. You're coming back down where you started from. So it's not like you're fulfilling a need to get from A to B across continents, which a supersonic flight of the future or suborbital would be very useful for. You're just getting rich people to pay lots of money so that you can go into space. Now, what extra technologies might come out of that that's useful for the future for space exploration, real space exploration? Yes, perhaps there is something there in the future, but at the moment, it's an extremely expensive game played by a small minority of the very ultra-wealthy, when really, if they were thinking about what could I do to help humanity with that money, there's far, far better things they could do, in my humble opinion.
Okay, thank you, Professor Parker, for your statement. And now let's have Dr. John Clark from Mars Society, Australia. He is arguing for the motion.
The recent development of suborbital human spaceflight is, to me, a very exciting development. It will open up, in my view, new opportunities, not just for human spaceflight, but also for a wide range of research and commercial development not presently available to scientists and entrepreneurs with current space systems. It also, of course, means that more people will be able to enjoy the experience of spaceflight for a few minutes at a time, and this will increase the ability of human participation in space.
Thank you. So finally, we have Professor Tong Jimeng making an opening statement. He is arguing against motion. Professor Tong, please.
Okay, thank you very much. And first of all, let me say that this current space race, or maybe space rat race, is immoral. I'm going to talk about this from the morality kind of ground. So at a time we think that the Earth is racked by the inequalities or inequities, proliferating kind of climate catastrophes, this very desperate, and plus this desperate effort to vaccinate all these people struggling against COVID-19. And so it is criminal, in fact, to allow these moguls to pour billions of dollars into this kind of adventures and for this very joyride, as my fellow panelist has been calling this. And so secondly, the billionaire space race will always have little impact on the people on the Earth, especially on the current on those now living in poverty. So it would do nothing for the common and public good, especially when companies like SpaceX and Blue Origins are determined to make money on the Earth's ground. Thirdly, this space race is squandering billions of dollars of public money and resources that belong to the people, and the principal benefits will go to the network of this self-dealing billionaires, is a special class of the ultra-rich. And lastly, the idea of making space travel more accessible to the general public is a hoax. By fooling people into believing that they are fulfilling a collective goal of human race, they're making one step closer to this fantasized kind of Star Trek-like future of boldly conceived space and exploration. But what the threes are really doing, the three people are really selling, are their company names. And an image of innovation and safety that will help this group of company pick up a contract, one contract or the other. And so this Branson, Bezos, Musk flight into space isn't being done for us. It's just for themselves. And so further further commercializations of low Earth orbit. As a result, this space rat race should be banned and barred. Give the money and resources back to the people and the power to decide how the money is spent and resources be allocated to the people. And power back to the people. Thank you.
Thank you. So we now hear the opening remarks of our four debaters, and now let's move on to our next round, which is the free discussion part. And Professor John Fan, I'd like to go back to you because just now your opponent said that actually we know that Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, their flights are suborbital. So scientifically speaking, to what extent are they scientifically relevant, or do they add anything to our scientific knowledge?
Right. So suborbit in itself isn't necessarily completely useless. Professor Parker just mentioned there's something called point-to-point travel. Essentially, if you go up and then you go very high, then you can travel at supersonic speeds, and then you can reach other places very fast. So that's, I think, what Richard Branson actually publicly stated. For Jeff Bezos, his longer-term goal, the current rocket is low. It's essentially a sounding rocket. It doesn't go into orbit, but he's working on very large rockets, and he's working on actually a more difficult technology. He's using hydrogen, while Elon Musk is using kerosene. Hydrogen is very difficult to work with because it makes metal brittle, but obviously the exhaust is just water, so it's safer, so it's cleaner. And also he's using things like combustion tap-off cycle, other innovations to make the weight of the rocket lighter. And both him and Elon Musk have been trying hard to reduce the cost of going to space. Elon Musk, in particular, reduced the cost to 1/10 of what it used to be to send a pound of payload up. And eventually that would enable space manufacturing. In space, in zero gravity, you can do a lot of things. For example, you can 3D print human organs. On Earth, this whole thing will collapse. You have to need scaffolding to hold it up, and obviously you don't want scaffolding in your organs. But in space, you can do that sort of things. So I do concur that currently it may sound frivolous, but I do think that there are a lot to look forward to, although it might be a bit in the future.
May I say something now? Yes, I mean, I just want to thank the previous speaker that I'm all for the things he was saying. In fact, building human organs in space in microgravity is a great thing. And there's so much you can actually do in space in terms of technology, 3D printing. I actually know some 3D printing. I've been 3D printing a CubeSat just now. Is that these are activities you can do on things like the International Space Station, the new Chinese space station that's just been put up into orbit. Quite recently. So these are, international collaborations, nation states coming together and building sophisticated international large-scale equipment which can benefit mankind in all of those ways. We're not actually talking about that because that's something I really do support. We're talking about something else here. We're talking about the morality or not of having billionaires, like in Bezos' case, who have made money from Amazon through the practices they have, which a lot of people around this planet think are not good, overall. They're great for the customers, not so great for every other vendor that's trying to make a living. And so there's all sorts of debates around that. And the profits from that are being used to spend on the vision for his own for space, and then to get the rich, the super rich, to pay to become space tourists, even if only for 1.5 minutes. And so, I mean, it's a question of that. The other speaker on my side talking about the morality, I think there's a really important point there, but it's a question of to what extent. There's always super rich. There's always been people that have a lot more than others. There are some nation states that try to spread things more equitably, and there are others that just go crazy capitalism, and then you end up with conflicts, wars, and terrible poverty, famine, and then people that don't have trying to take those from what they have. So if you're in balance, if you can balance things out more sensibly across the planet, and yes, you're going to have rich people, you're going to have people that are going to, because through their own hard work and entrepreneurship, be very successful. But, it's a question of scale and a question of social responsibility to the enormous wealth that you've accrued and how you spend it.
Okay, so I like to get the response from Dr. John Clark on that question, because I believe that most of the negative reaction to this billionaire space is that this is not only about sending people into space, it's about rich people. And I guess that is why over 160,000 people signed that petition to ask Jeff Bezos to just stay out there. He should not return. But anyway, he returned. But the question is, do you feel that instead of racing in space, they should better spend the money to solve some more urgent crisis on Earth?
I think there's two components to that question that you've asked. I mean, first of all, the fact that people, billionaires, are racing. I think that's inaccurate. It's a very common statement, but it doesn't describe the situation. It's not a race in the sense of very rich people building yachts to race for the America's Cup. Right. This instead is two entrepreneurs with a long history in entrepreneurship going back many years, both investing over a 10 to 20 year period in developing suborbital spaceflight. So while, yes, one of them got there first, it's not a case of the winner takes everything and they get a nice trophy and they can put it on their shelf and say how good they are. Rather, these are two different organizations, two different companies developing this new technology, which they then can sell on the marketplace. And there's been a lot of research, and we know from that research that the market for this is very, very large. The second one is, should there be better uses than money? One of the really odd things that strikes me as a space advocate is that people only make that sort of statement about spaceflight. Yeah, why don't people who spend money or countries spending money to go to the International Space Station, for example, or launch the International Space Station, why don't they use that money to solve global warming or whatever? They never turn around and say, what about all the money that goes into improving roads? Why can't that be used instead for solving global warming? I checked today, the American the company Intel that builds computer chips, just in the last few months has committed $20 billion, far more than Elon Musk and Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos combined have spent in space building new computer chips, or building two new computer chip companies. No one said a word about, they should use that money to build more hospitals. No, people understand that Intel is a big company and they are very good at building computer chips, and they want to invest in that area. This is exactly the same thing. These are people who are rich, who are entrepreneurs, and they want to invest in this new venture.
Yes, I understand. But as we all know, these billionaires, they are salesmen. They are not scientists. So if they are really interested in space exploration, they want to do their part in this mission, why can't they just donate the money to the scientists instead of doing it themselves?
A good question. And I'll say there's two reasons. First of all, in the case of Bezos and Richard Branson, their vision is to develop industries and capabilities in areas that don't exist. So let's say they gave $20 million or $100 million to scientists interested in studying the upper atmosphere. Those scientists couldn't then go and study the upper atmosphere as well as they can, or they can now, using the service they've provided. It's like people saying a company has decided to build ships. Why didn't they give that money to scientists who want to study the ocean, and they could use that to study the ocean? But if those ships aren't available, they can't do it anyway. So the company is interested in providing a service which other people can then use. If we take another example of Elon Musk, I mean, he has received billions of dollars from the US government, and his rockets can now launch satellites for scientists, for private companies, for government agencies. So that is something that's happening, and the same will happen with Blue Origin, with Virgin Galactic. I have a friend who's going to be flying on Virgin Galactic, all being well, next year, doing research. So, a railway company, a shipping company, an airline company doesn't do research, but it enables other people to do that, other people to build new businesses.
I actually posted this question on Quora, and I got some very different answers. Sam Zabib is an engineer, and he said, the only thing that billionaires should objectively do is pay their fair share of taxes. Also, their use of wealth impact public politics should be curtailed. World issues like fixing climate change, COVID, endemic poverty, or working on clean energy cannot be resolved as part of charitable efforts by billionaires. If they venture into this area, it's probably mostly to embellish their own image or gain access to public policy. Another answer by William Mook, he is a technology provider at Intel, and he said, billionaires who are honest have already created trillions of dollars of wealth to get their billions. How they spend it doesn't matter as long as they do not engage in crimes. They've created tremendous wealth to get the money they have. Creating wealth gives us the capacity to solve urgent problems. So my question for the opposition side, if the billionaires want to spend their fortunes blasting off into space, is it anyone else's business? Professor Tone.
Well, yes and no, but mostly, no. Basically, this is a company, the higher people, the higher citizens and higher, the general, skilled workers from the general public. And so their money, also this is a publicly listed company. And so they should be held responsible for the general public in terms of how they distribute their profit, how to use their profit, how to spend the money that they make by actually working, by hiring and working and contributing to this very general market. And so the money they spend should be, the way that they spend the money should be subject to public scrutiny and being examined and reviewed by the government, by the regulators, and by certain organizations.
I disagree. So first of all, SpaceX and Blue Origin, they're private companies. They're not listed in the public stock market. And I know the investors in those companies, and they're happy what they're doing. And also, Virgin Galactic is listed, and I don't know any of their shareholders have any problem with that. Beyond the shareholders, I don't think that argument goes for the general public. You might argue that they receive some government contracts, and therefore every taxpayer has some say. But that extends to the content of the contract, which it's not free money. They have to provide services at acceptable levels, and otherwise they get punished for that. You may argue whether they should have that money in the first place, but that's how the economic system works.
Dr. John Clark, I think two questions here. First of all, there are taxpayers' money in these projects. For example, Elon Musk is getting contracts from both NASA and the military. And secondly, if we look at the way they earn their money, they actually earn their money through hiring low-wage workers and shuffling between the tax havens. That is why Bernie Sanders said on Twitter, here on Earth, in the richest country on the planet, half of our people live paycheck to paycheck. People are struggling to feed themselves, struggling to see a doctor, but hey, the richest guys in the world are off in outer space. Yes, it's time to tax the billionaires.
I mean, these are all good points, but they are secondary points. We're not having discussion to say, are these people good human beings? And they all have problems. I mean, Elon Musk is a very strange person. If you talk to people who have met him, if you look at some of what he says on Twitter, you really have to wonder. He often ignores a lot of essential regulation to make sure that what he does should be done safely. Jeff Bezos, we know Amazon workers are appallingly badly treated. I will not use Amazon if I can help it, for that reason. Richard Branson does pay his people very well, but he's been to jail for tax fraud. But that's not the question here. The question is what they're doing a legitimate enterprise? And I think by and large it is. Bezos and Richard Branson have used almost entirely their own money and money of investors who believe in what they're doing. Elon Musk has benefited enormously from the US taxpayer. I think it's about $9 billion that he's received, enough to build a nuclear aircraft carrier. It's an enormous amount of money. But from that, he has built a successful family of rockets. He has built spacecraft that can carry astronauts safely so far to the International Space Station and cargo to the International Space Station. So, like a lot of government investment, the whole society benefits.
Both Bezos and Elon Musk, they have very lofty ambitions. For example, Bezos said that he wants to develop a sustained human presence on the moon and move heavy industries there. And Elon Musk says that he wants to build a human settlement on Mars, where he said he would like to die. So I'd like to go to Professor Quentin Parker. What do you make of their ambitions, and do you think they are realistic ones?
Well, I think these are the kind of grandiose ambitions which normally would be the remit of international cooperation and nation states coming together to realize such an important dream for humanity as a whole. And whether actually this should indeed be the preserve of billionaires who may have acquired their wealth through some of the ways a previous speaker has described is one thing, and whether or not through just the fact that you become a billionaire through your business acumen or luck or a combination of exploitation and tax dodging, that you would be in such a position to allow your own personal dreams to set a national agenda in terms of something as significant as the exploration and colonization of the moon and Mars. These are such enormous enterprises that I think these are the preserve of international cooperation and treaties and things of that nature, where things can be sorted out properly and not at the whims and personal desires of a few ultra-rich individuals. Now, the fact that they may think that's a good thing for humanity, that's fine, and I support that. I think it is important to do that, but whether they should be doing them themselves is something which is why we're having a debate. And I think, it's good to have a debate like this because it isn't black and white. Every speaker, I think, has had valid points to make here and there about all sorts of issues around this whole process, myself included. And so it comes back to the other speaker on my side about, is it actually moral? Whether it can be done or not, whether the systems and regulatory frameworks allows it to be pursued is one thing, but whether or not it should be pursued in the way it is by these individuals and super rich with their own agendas and their own perhaps crazy ideas, which may not be the best, is another. A lot of the things that Dr. Clark was saying, I support, but these things can already be done and are being done in other ways without the need for space tourism or for billionaires to have their own vision and version of what can be done. I am not saying that there cannot be positive things that will come out of their investments. And the question is that the best use of the money to achieve those positive things, or are there other more efficient, more professional, more cooperative, international ways that such things can be done for a greater fraction of humanity?
So, Dr. Zhang Fan, I'd like to get your view on this. What do you make of their ambitions to migrate to Mars or to the moon? And what do you think is really driving their ambitions? And do you think the intention matters?
No. Here's where I differ from other people. I don't think an altruistic purpose, reasoning needs to be there for the eventual outcome to be good, and I concentrate on the outcome. Essentially, I think why they're doing it is because they already got fortune. They're seeking fame, right? They want to be the Columbus of the New Ages, taking people to new regions. Nobody remembers some random rich guy during Columbus time, but everybody knows who Columbus is. So they're doing that for their own personal ego, but I think that's fine. Professor Parker have a good point that whether what they're doing can be better done more in a more safe way by governmental bodies. But I would argue that they're doing a lot of frivolous things that other people think are crazy. For example, Elon Musk trying to nuke Mars to increase the atmosphere. I don't think it's going to work. But if they're going to waste money, it might work. This kind of high risk, possibly high return stuff, it's better to waste their money than waste my taxpayer money, to be honest. So yeah, that's my argument. But I do agree that there needs to be oversight. Otherwise, they're going to break stuff. And when you do things on that astral scale, the disaster will be astral scale. So
if we let billionaires unfettered actions. So Elon Musk decides he thinks if he nukes Mars, it'll create a thick atmosphere. It's like terraforming, and you might be able to inhabit Mars once the radiation dies down or whatever. I mean, is that something we should even allow people to do? Who says he has a right to go and nuke Mars? I mean, it's just insane. This is something that I think you need international regulations and the Court of Human Rights and other stuff to and the United Nations to look at stuff like this. We got to be careful, with personal freedoms and people's personal ability to make and generate wealth, and how they generate that wealth cannot be unfettered in the modern world. I don't think it's moral to allow such unfettered wealth to be accrued and spent in any way they particularly want. Maybe they wanted to go and do something else instead of go to space. What if they decided, well, I want to just create nanobots, and I'm going to spend billions and billions of dollars on creating nanobots to take over the planet? Who knows where these are? We've got to be careful here about this kind of thing. Just because you've got enormous wealth comes enormous responsibility to use that wealth wisely, not just for their own business ends and for their own wealth creation and for the people that work for them, but for the greater good of humanity, I believe.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, Joying. If I can jump in a little bit, I think the idea of settling on the Mars or on the moon is archaic. I mean, the whole thing is so very, colonial and also very kind of imperialistic to me. The idea of settling people, for example, transporting people using these rockets, first thing to me is not realistic. I mean, think Elon Musk, who's talking about sending 100,000 people on the moon. Now, how do you govern a huge community on the moon? I mean, once again, you're not a government, you're just a company, and you govern people as if, like a CEO governing a company. I mean, that could be such a crazy idea. And so in this sense, I think the colonialism is not the solution to the complex social, political, and economic ills that we are now witnessing on this planet Earth. Bezos' famous idea is that we leave the planet. We leave behind all these people out there and selected only the very few, the very ultra-rich few, out to the moon, out to this very Mars. So the very fundamentals seems to be neglected. The very moral side of this venture is not acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Well, we actually have a Mars expert here, Dr. John Clark. What do you make of the idea of colonizing Mars or colonizing the space? Because that really reminds us of the colonial period. Are they adopting a similar kind of colonial mindset in the space exploration?
Well, I think there are two components again to that question. First of all of us, it doesn't matter what part of the world you come to, except perhaps parts of Africa, where our ancestors did not come from somewhere else. So, I live in Australia. My ancestors came from various parts of England, 100, 200 odd years ago. The early, the first people to go to China probably emigrated from Africa through the Middle East, tens of thousands of years ago. We are all migrants. We are all colonizers.
So you do believe this is the same kind of colonizing mindset?
At the fundamental level, yes. Of course, we live in the 21st century. We do things differently to our ancestors, but the basic principle is the same. Now, the second half of that question, I think, is the more interesting one, is can we do it? And I don't know. Because to me, there are two, while it's a wonderful vision about exploring space, which we are doing and I hope we continue to do, and more people and more countries will do it. And settling space is a great idea to think my great-grandchildren might one day live on Mars or the moon. We don't know whether it's physically possible. Until we start having babies on the moon, on Mars, we don't know whether it's actually possible for them to be conceived, to develop safe normally, to grow up normally, and live a long and useful life. We can only find that out by doing it. So it's a question to answer, a worthwhile question to answer. If we can't do it, well, we can't do it. We stay here forever. But if we can do it, I think we should take the opportunity. The other important thing that people forget is that when you look at settlements perhaps in the last few hundred years, whether we are talking about Europeans settling in Australia or the Americas, or whether you're talking about people moving out into, say, the deserts of the world and settling there, it has to be economically viable, right? They have to have something worth selling, whatever that might be, and so that they can buy the things that they can't make. A couple of years ago, I was in the Canadian Arctic, in a lovely little town called Resolute, 200 people. They live on tourism, on being a base of operations for governments and researchers, and their people have been lived in that part of the world for a long, long time. But the people who have moved there do so because there's something they can it's a way to earn money, and they use that to buy the things they can't buy, like snowmobiles and televisions. And so there's trade. At the moment, we don't know of anything that we can find on the moon or Mars or manufacture there that would justify it. We could learn knowledge. I mean, would a Mars settlement or a lunar settlement generate enough new knowledge that people would pay for to support them? We don't know. Maybe on the moon we can mine water, which could be turned into rocket propellant. Possibly. It's certainly technically possible. Is it economically viable? We don't know. So that's something that only time will tell. So makes a great story, but it's a question to be answered in the future.
Yeah. Could I just say something at this point, if I may?
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Just going back to that previous speaker, Dr. Clark, I don't think it's a question of finding new ways and having new experiences. So let's go to Mars, have a new human experience and a new way of looking at things. For me, it's actually existential. I mean, I am for colonization or exploration in deep space and getting out there for the far future of humanity, and maybe sooner than we think. And that is because not only is our planet becoming increasingly difficult to live in. And I think this will accelerate very soon, and the effects of climate change are becoming more evident every day. But of course, there is a threat of destruction from outside our own planet through asteroidal impact and other things like the dinosaurs, extreme extinction level events, etc., etc. But ultimately, I just think that humanity needs a plan B for the far future. And to do that, we have to start now, testing technology and things to get off this rock and to be able to live as a species elsewhere in the solar system and eventually further beyond. So I am of that ilk, that I do believe that's something that we should be looking into in one way or another, whether billionaires should be doing it or nation states. This is what part of this debate is about. But I'm not against deep space exploration or having moon bases and eventually trying to set up a colony on Mars or whatever it is we'll have in a decade or several decades from now. I think it is important for our ultimate survival as a species. That's my personal view. And so, but it's not really, it's just answering the previous speaker's part about, human experience. I'd rather talk about the existential survival of the human race, actually.
Okay, so Dr. Zhang Fan, I'd like to get your thought on this colonization of Mars, because actually we've already seen big tech companies acting like digital oligarchies and the power they have over a global or public conversation. So in this sense, do you feel the government are better suited for long-term space exploration and investment? Because the private companies, they are not governed by the people, but by the shareholders or CEOs.
Right. So that's an interesting question. So, because as Professor Tong said earlier, I do think a part of why Elon Musk wants to go to Mars is because he doesn't think the governments are competent enough or moral enough or whatever enough. Because Professor Tong said the best scenario would be for international, everybody coming together, do it legally, do it everything, but just look around in the reality, it doesn't seem to be happening that way. And I think at least a little bit of the motivations for Elon Musk to go to Mars is to set up his own thing. I think he explicitly said Earth's law doesn't apply to Mars. So he wants to have his own thing where he carries the torch of humanity. Whether that's I don't know. If it doesn't go back to war with Earth, maybe.
He's an anarchist, Professor John. He's an anarchist. Yeah. He doesn't care whether there is a government or not, right? Yeah. He's kind of a... Right.
That's part of the thing about billionaires. They're egotistic. They think they're super smart. They think that's how they got the money. So that's the argument Professor Parker put forward, whether they should be doing it or other people should be doing it. But I don't know. History is made by egotistic people. So,
okay. I think just now Professor Parker mentioned a very interesting point about finding a plan B for the Earth, because we haven't solved our problems here on the Earth. So, Dr. John Clark, I'd like to get your thought on this. Do you think it is time for us to look for a plan B for the Earth? Do you think we should maybe try to fix our problems here first? Because so far, the Earth we haven't found any other planets that's more inhabitable than the Earth, right? And I guess there must be a lot more problems for us to be solved in the space.
Yes, that's true. And so I think people who say, we will go to Mars because it's planet B, well, it's not. There's no place on Earth, except the bottom of the ocean, where it would be as hard to live, as challenging to live as on the surface of Mars. On the other hand, we have hundreds of people, thousands over summer, working in the Antarctic every year because it's worthwhile. There's things we can do there, including tourism, that makes people worthwhile for people to live there and work there. On Earth, the majority of people, for the foreseeable future, maybe not in 1,000 years' time, but for the foreseeable future, will be where almost everybody lives. And yes, we need to do, and we are doing, a great deal to improve life here. It may not seem like it in the middle of a pandemic, but if you look at how our ancestors lived, our parents lived, our grandparents lived, for almost everybody on Earth, they live better now than they did. When I grew up, we didn't have television. We didn't have running water. We had a tap that ran some of the day. We had a toilet, a septic tank at the bottom of the garden. My mother didn't finish high school. My father finished high school. I'm the first person in my family to have gone to university. And this isn't just me or people like me. This is worldwide. And if you look at the data from the UNDP, from the World Bank, from all of these organizations whose job is to compile how people are living, it's the same story the world over. There's a wonderful website put out by Hans Rosling, who passed away now, a Swedish demographer and medical doctor, called Gapminder, and he shows very clearly the statistics that everyone can use, how for pretty well everyone, even people in the poorest countries, have improved enormously in almost every measure over the last 100 years. And it's very encouraging. I mean, there's so much doom and gloom now, but I see grounds for hope if we continue to make the right decisions. And despite wars and terrorism and pandemics and economic depressions and superpower rivalry, for the last 50 years, we have, on average, been making the best decisions, or the right decisions, enough of them to make a difference.
Yeah, hopefully we can do that in the future as well.
Professor Tong, what do you make of the relationship of exploring the space, finding other planets, and protecting this one?
Well, I think that we need a do this wisely by striking a balance between protecting the Earth, conserving the oceans or the natural environment, but at the same time, yes, I mean, we do need some brave people, some people with wild imaginations to explore options, maybe not on Earth but in the deep universe. So in this sense, I think that this effort made to explore the deeper universe is encouraged, should be encouraged. But at the same time, what I argue is that we should not ignore this very past experience, the past legacy left behind by this sort of adventurous enterprises. And so in this sense, I think that we need to stop and slow down and think about our growth patterns based on expropriation, enslavement, and environmental transformation in defiance of all limits. We need to be aware of the limits on our side. Money cannot solve all these problems. Money cannot provide the best technology, or even you come up with the technology and that technology may not be working. And so in this sense, we need to strike a balance. We need to slow down and think hard in terms of creating this very kill-all sort of solution. In this sense, I once again wanted to go back to this very collective effort. I think that we need to rely on the collective endeavor organized by such organizations like the United Nations, the World Health Organizations, the World Agricultural Organizations. These organizations provide down-to-earth skills or fundings or manpower to solve these problems. Individuals such as Bezos or Elon Musk, they think too much in advance. And I think past experience, ever since 1969, I mean, that 1969 moon exploration doesn't help that much. Instead, it kicked off a kind of arms race in between the former Soviet Union and the United States. And if you look at the universe right now, we are actually working or looking into. There are thousands and thousands of satellites for military use. I mean, the whole universe is almost armed by nations, by superpowers who wants to control. And so in this sense, these technologies, like the Elon Musk SpaceX technologies, and basal technology basically will be subject to future military use, and that's the danger I need to call for attention by our panelists.
Yes, I agree that actually many of our problems on Earth, like the nuclear threat or the environmental pollution, they are products of science. So the science can be used for both good and evil. So Dr. Zhang Fan, how do you think we can make good use of science while making sure that they won't be used for evil purposes?
So first of all, I completely disagree with the statement that the problems on Earth are caused by science. You can go back to Stone Age and everybody living in cages, they will still be killing each other with sticks, right? So science knowledge is neutral. It doesn't have good or bad. The problem is there are always bad actors making bad use of it. And I do agree that with more capabilities, there's more imminent danger. I'll mention one. So in the US, you can buy CRISPR genetic editing tools, and you can use that to blend a whole bunch of viruses together and then make something a lot worse than COVID. Everybody can do that. I think that's what Bill Gates was warning about. So to prevent this sort of things happening, I do think needs to be a lot more foresight. Scientists, first of all, needs to stop being biased that my stuff can only be good. They need to think backup plans for if things goes wrong. And lawmakers needs to be at least scientifically literate and competent to be able to understand what the hell is going on. But I don't think it's a good idea to just sit on your hand and do nothing and just stonewall scientific progress altogether, because I don't think politicians will ever reach any consensus. That will just stop us from solving problems. Science provides solutions for climate change, the solar panels and everything. All that comes from science. It doesn't come from good wishful thinking.
Professor Parker, I'd like to ask you, actually, some of the problems on Earth, some of the perhaps potential environmental catastrophes like the ozone layer depletion, greenhouse warming, and nuclear winter, these discoveries have strong ties with space exploration. Is that right? So do you feel that sometimes the space exploration can help us solve some of the problems here on Earth?
Very good question. I certainly believe that our ability to monitor the entire Earth ecosystem from ground up, right up into space, is incredibly important for understanding the changes that are coming. I mean, the previous speaker, but one, Dr. Clark, was mentioning about, we've made tremendous strides here, there, and everywhere. Well, of course we have, and we've made tremendous strides at the same time as we've made tremendous strides in deforestation, tremendous strides in desertification, tremendous strides in pollution, and the decrease in the amount of biodiversity through massive extinction. We're going through an extinction event right now in the Anthropocene, which is, the man-induced climate change. We are actually beyond the point of no return for several important tipping points in the Earth's climate already. So even if we stopped emitting every molecule of CO2 today, it wouldn't stop the changes that are also coming. It's now just a question of mitigation. You just have to look at the consensus amongst the thousands of climate scientists in all countries working on this for decades to understand that they've been telling us for decades of how serious the changes are. And it's becoming more evident. So even Donald Trump should now be able to recognize that something is not quite right with the planet. Space can help us analyze, monitor, and show us the areas of concern that we might be able to do something about. And technology and science can certainly help us, carbon capture kinds of technologies that enable us to generate power without having to burn fossil fuels is absolutely crucial. And I would even put nuclear in that mix along with geothermal, hydropower, solar and wind, and even from the tides. And so we need to find every single way of generating power we can, every single efficiency in how we use power that we can, and the water is the next big problem around the world, potable water. We've got too many humans on this planet. That's basically the problem. There's too many billions of us. We need to also somehow improve education and family planning so that the population of humanity stabilizes, so not every other living creature on this planet has to suffer as a result of this one species. And so, yes, space and activities from space, remote sensing and monitoring of the ocean's temperatures and the melting ice caps and the deforestation, and the spreading of all the deserts. We need to monitor that so we know it's happening. But then it's a question of what can we do about stopping it. And again, science can certainly help play a primary. Probably the only thing that can be done is to use science to help to mitigate what's coming, and a lot of that will be from space.
Yes, so I think we have a very interesting discussion today. So let's move on to our final round. I'd like to give each of you 1 minute to summarize your point. And also, I'm wondering if there was a point during our discussion that somehow make you change your mind. Let's start with Professor Zhang Fan again.
I do understand a lot more of people's concern now regarding the morality side of it, what their concerns are, whether the billionaires should be doing it. So I think we sort of converge a little bit onto the fact that there needs to be supervision of what they're doing, rather than just letting them run wild. That I do agree. However, overall, I still think that counting the good and risk is overall still a positive, that they're doing it rather than spending their money on yachts.
First of all, I think it's been a very interesting debate, and it's nice to share a platform with great intellectuals with good ideas and decent opinions. I think it's not black and white. I think that's why we can have a decent debate. It's because it's not one side or the other 100%. I've changed because I understand now some of the issues around freedom and around some of the benefits that the billionaires bring in their endeavors. I haven't changed my fundamental opinion about the moral side of things, in terms of how the precious resources of this planet, given everything that's happening, there's a responsibility overall to the whole of humanity to do this wisely. And that's the issue for me. Can we wisely allow the super wealthy to dictate the direction of progress in certain areas of international strategic importance?
I suspect none of the people who took part in the discussion have changed their minds. Mm-hmm. But I would like to think that some of the things that people said may have encouraged the audience, some people in the audience who are sitting on the fence, to perhaps reconsider to change their minds. Because in the end, we're all on the same side. We all want a better future for our children, our grandchildren, for the world. For those of us who lived through the Cold War, we don't want to see that coming back. For those of us who grew up in poor countries like I did, we don't want to go back to then either. For me, not for everyone, perhaps, so certainly not for everyone. The idea that we can develop suborbital human spaceflight to increase the range of research and space commercial activities is a good thing that will benefit an ever greater number of people.
I absolutely agree. This is a very intellectual conversation with great people, scientists. I respect scientists, and because I know so little about the space technology, and so the stuff that I changed is that I would respect the technology, the technocrats who use technology to improve, to explore. What remain unchanged, once again, is that very moral ground on which that technology should be applied, money be spent, resources being allocated. And so, once again, I think that I would applaud the regulators' efforts in, and also my fellow panelists' idea in kind of like scrutinize the money being spent, resources allocated, and so the wisdom that we need to, in fact, to get involved in our future exploration of the universe.
Yes. Okay, thank you for your closing remarks. I want to add one more question here, if you don't mind, because the topic today really reminds me of Carl Sagan's book, The Pale Blue Dot, which he said the irony that how the spaceflight, which is driven by nationalistic rivalries and hatred, but it has brought with it a transnational vision. And he said, you spend even a little time in contemplating the Earth from the orbit, and the most deeply ingrained nationalisms begin to erode. So none of us have ever been to space, but I know many of you study astronomy. So I'm wondering if you're getting the similar kind of feeling.
Very much. I think we can Think back to the Apollo program, which was primarily a nationalistic enterprise. The people taking part were, all but one of them were from a military background. And intelligence, but very, very nationalistic. But when the first crew got to the moon, Apollo 8, and they took that wonderful photo of the Earth rising over the edge of the moon, that was a transformative image in the history of humanity. It's probably the most reproduced photograph in history, and it has been used to inspire people to protect the environment. To recognize we all live on spaceship Earth. No one talked about spaceship Earth before then. To work together rather than to compete. People found philosophical and religious inspiration in that beautiful blue bubble hanging there in space. And the whole idea of not only of spaceship Earth, but the idea of called the overlook or the overview effect, which many, many astronauts from many, many countries have experienced. And not just going to the moon, but just going to Earth orbit, and indeed just going on a suborbital flight for a few minutes.
To me, actually, this very particular moment reminds me of a good friend John Thornton's words. That is, if one happens to be out there in the universe and look down to the Earth, you don't think about nations, you think about human race, and you think about humanity. And so science at the service of humanity is my ultimate goal in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we explore the space, we get to know that our Earth is just a very small stage in this vast cosmic arena. Tiny as it is, there are plenty of things for us to be done here in our world. So I think while we keep our eyes on the stars, we should never forget the ground under our feet, because this is our home. And that is my perspective. Thank you all for joining our discussion today. And hopefully by watching us, we have gained a more comprehensive understanding of this topic. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.